The topic for our presentation is a research article on the effect of climate warming on the increased frequency of wildfires. The authors conducted a study to determine why there has been such an increase in wildfire activity. Their article discusses their findings, which we will summarize throughout this presentation.
Wildfires have been in the news a lot recently. At the beginning of the year, there were the fires in Australia that burned for weeks, and closer to home, California and Oregon have both been ravaged by terrible wildfires. This increase in news about wildfires isn't too surprising, as the amount of wildfires in general have been increasing throughout the years. However, what is an actual wildfire? It is an uncontrolled fire that burns in wild vegetation in any type of ecosystem. Forest, desert, it doesn't matter. They can start due to natural causes such as a lightning strike, or due to human interference such as pyrotechnics and fireworks. Wildfires can be beneficial to the environment as they clear dead debris and allow for new plants to grow, as well as providing nutrients to the soil. However, more often, they can cause extreme and irreversible damage to natural resources. They also negatively affect humans, as federal agencies have spent more than $1 billion a year on fighting fires in recent years. Hundreds can lose their homes, and in some cases, even their lives to terrible wildfires. Fire management officials and scientists have narrowed the list of possible causes behind the increased number of wildfires to two feasible reasons. The first is land use history. Wildfires used to burn frequently and small, naturally, but as humans settled and formed communities, they suppressed the fires. Humans use vast amounts of land for agricultural use through farming and animals, which disrupts the natural cycles of wildfires. This can cause dead material to accumulate, so when a fire does break out, it burns longer and hotter. However, if this is the cause, there are two solutions that could be implemented. They are ecological restoration and fuels treatment. The second possible cause of the increased wildfires is climate change. Throughout the years, it's been getting hotter and drier, which is a perfect combination for fires. Once they get that initial spark, they have nothing to slow them down. The leaves aren't wet, there's nothing to stop them. However, if this is the case, then the two previously mentioned solutions provide no benefits at all.
The two main competing explanations for the current trend in wildfire activity are naturally caused and human-caused fires. Some similarities between both are that they are forest fires, and even though they are the two leading causes, these fires normally both occur unintentionally for very different reasons. The difference between the two are that natural fires are generally started by lightning, with a very small percentage started by dry fuel such as sawdust and leaves. Hand-caused fires can be due to any number of reasons. Some classifications include smoking, bonfires, and equipment.
The authors used a compare and contrast method in this study to address their questions. They gathered a list of time series of 1,166 large forest fires from 1970 to 2003. This list contained most western forested areas. This data was compared with hydroclimatic and land surface variables that corresponded to the western forested areas. The authors analyzed this data by developing different line graphs along with a dot plot to see the effects each of the datasets had on one another. The authors then determined the statistical associations between the variables to determine whether these variables affected one another and if they had a positive or negative correlation. By comparing and contrasting these two datasets, they were able to determine possible explanations as to where and why large forest fire frequency has changed.
Now for our results. Research studied three different areas: increased forest wildfire activity, the fire activity in the timing of spring snowmelt, and spatial variability in the wildfire response to an earlier spring. Researchers found that large wildfires in western forests had increased in the mid-1980s. They also found that between 1970 to 1986, wildfire frequency was nearly 4 times the average, and the total area burned by these fires was more than 6.5 times its previous level. Therefore, they concluded that the frequency of wildfires had been increasing in recent years. They also found that interannual variability in wildfire frequency was strongly associated with regional spring and summer temperatures. They came to this conclusion using Spearman's correlation of 0.76. Overall, this means that the wildfire frequency was strongly correlated with spring and summer temperatures, meaning that the higher the temperatures, the more wildfires that occurred. Wildfire season also increased in length of days, and this was found in the 1980s. When comparing 1970 to 1986 with 1987 to 2003, researchers found the average season length increased by 78 days. About 48% of this increase was due to earlier ignitions, and about 52% was due to a later control. Furthermore, researchers found that the annual length of fire season and the average time each fire burned was moderately correlated with each other and with regional spring and summer temperatures, also using Spearman's correlation. The greatest increase in wildfire frequency was in the Northern Rockies, which was about 60% of the increase in large fires. Furthermore, researchers found that the greatest increase of wildfires is shown to be around 2,130 meters in elevation. With this, researchers found that wildfire frequency was increasing in later years and was also strongly associated with changes in spring snow melt timing, and also changes in temperature. Researchers also studied fire activity and the timing of spring snowmelt. As a proxy for timing of spring snowmelt, the researchers used Stewart and colleagues' data of the center of mass annual flow, or CT, for the snowmelt. They found that wildfire frequency was highly correlated but inversely with CT or snowmelt times. Therefore, this was a signal of wildfire sensitivity to snowmelt timing in these areas. This negative correlation shows that earlier snowmelt dates correspond to an increase in wildfire frequency. They also found that 56% of wildfires and 72% of area burned occurred in earlier snowmelt years than in later years. Again, which proves that the earlier snowmelt dates correspond to an increase in wildfires. Furthermore, researchers found that spring and summer temperatures have been increasing in later years. From 1987 to 2003, the degrees in the spring and summer were 0.87 Celsius higher than in earlier years. This shows that earlier snowmelt can lead to an earlier and longer dry season, which provides a greater opportunity for larger fires. Finally, researchers looked at the spatial variability in the wildlife in response to an earlier spring. They found that there were more frequent wildfires and warmer temperatures, and this was due to a distribution of forest area and also the water balance in changing spring. Utilizing the October to September moisture deficit, which was the difference between potential evapotranspiration due to temperature and the actual evapotranspiration. This can be an important indicator of drought stress in plants. They also used the percent difference in the moisture deficit for earlier versus late snowmelt years. Overall, researchers found that the Northern Rockies and Northern California display the greatest vulnerability by this measure, and they also account for more than 3/4 of increased wildfire frequency since the mid-1980s. They also looked at what elevation had an effect on. The higher the elevations, the longer dry seasons were relatively short in recent years. In lower elevations, they had longer dry seasons than in earlier years. They also found that the droughts here tend to be longer and more intense. In the first figure on the left, marked A, it shows the western U.S. forest wildfires in spring and summer temperatures compared to each other. From the graph, we can see that the higher the temperature is, the more wildfires that occurred. Then in our next figure B on the left, it shows the timing of spring and snow melt. Then the third graph on the left, marked C, shows the annual time between the first and last fire ignition and the last large fire control. In the figure on the right, marked A, we can see Pearson's rank of the correlation between annual western U.S. large fires and the center of timing. In the graph under that, next to it, marked B on the right, it shows the average frequency of wildfires by elevation in the early to mid and late snowmelt years from 1970 to 2002. When comparing the two figures marked B, we can see that there were more wildfires when there were earlier spring snow melts. These graphs show us the correlation between wildfire frequency with spring and summer temperature and also wildfire frequency versus the spring snowmelt timing. These figures show us the average difference between early and late snowmelt years in average precipitation from October through May. In the first one, it is the average temperature from March through August. In the second figure, marked B, in figure 3, there was a t-test that was run and showed that the precipitation from October through May is normally distributed, could not be rejected. In the graph on the far right, labeled figure 4, we can see the percent difference in cumulative moisture deficit from October to August. Again, these figures illustrate the moisture deficit and also how wildfire frequency is also based upon distribution of forest area and also the local water balance and changes in the timing of spring.
While larger areas, such as Northern California, show more impact from land use history, smaller areas show more impact from early snowmelt years due to the little human interaction in early snowmelt years, which causes temperatures to increase sooner and moisture rates in the soil to increase the density of forests, thus causing more wildfire risks. The Northern Rockies is shown to have the greatest increase in large wildfires due to its forest type and its middle to high elevation, which is linked to better conditions for wildfires. The main purpose of this study is to analyze the trend that climate and land use history have had on forests in the past years and use this data to predict and rationalize future wildfire trends. Some of the main factors that this study found to contribute to wildfires is the timing of snowmelt years and the elevation in which the forests are located. The early snowmelt years are linked to earlier springs, which causes temperatures to prematurely increase, thus creating a longer burn season. This study also found that the forests having medium elevation were highly affected by wildfires.